Is this your cart, and where did you get this cereal?
Yes, it is. I just grabbed the box right there.
All right, let's step over here for a second.
A routine grocery trip turned into a public spectacle within seconds. In the middle of a brightly lit aisle, surrounded by shelves of packaged food and weekend shoppers, federal agents approached a black man pushing a cart filled with clearly visible unpaid merchandise. They did not ask to see a receipt. They did not quietly clarify a misunderstanding. Instead, they accused him of theft in front of strangers, escalating a simple shopping trip into a scene of suspicion, authority, and humiliation. Customers stopped. Phones appeared. Surveillance cameras captured every movement. The man insisted he had done nothing wrong, pointing to the items in his cart in the checkout lanes only steps away. But the agents pressed forward, invoking federal authority inside a neighborhood grocery store. What followed was not just a detention, it became a legal battle involving allegations of procedural misconduct, questions about evidence handling, and a lawsuit seeking $30,000 in damages. The case would test not only the facts of that day, but the limits of accountability when federal enforcement actions intersect with ordinary civilian life. And in the end, the outcome would leave more questions than closure. The confrontation began in the middle of a grocery store aisle, under bright fluorescent lights and security cameras fixed to the ceiling. A black man stood beside his shopping cart, frozen in place, as two federal agents positioned themselves on either side of him. The cart was half full with packaged meat, cereal, cleaning supplies, and bottled drinks. Other customers slowed their steps. Some stared. One person lifted a phone and began recording. The agents had approached him without warning. According to store surveillance later reviewed, he had entered the store alone, taken a cart from the entrance, and moved calmly through several aisles. He selected items carefully, checking labels and prices. Nothing in his movement suggested urgency or concealment. He had not gone near the exit. He had not passed a checkout lane, yet, in that aisle, he was told he was suspected of theft. He remained still, hands visible at his sides. His posture was tense, but controlled. He pointed toward the front of the store where open registers waited. The agents did not step back. They identified themselves as federal officers and instructed him not to leave. Shoppers nearby exchanged uncertain looks. A mother guided her child into another aisle. A store employee stood several feet away, unsure whether to intervene. The moment felt public and contained at the same time, as if the rest of the store continued while this single space tightened around him. Ceiling cameras recorded every angle. Later footage would show that he never attempted to run. He did not raise his voice. He did not push past the agents. Still, the tone shifted from inquiry to control within minutes. One agent moved closer to the cart, glancing inside as if confirming evidence already assumed. The other stood near the man's shoulder, limiting his movement without touching him. The aisle grew quiet. The sound of refrigerator units and distant register beeps filled the silence. He had entered the store expecting a routine stop on his way home. Instead, he now stood accused in front of strangers. The agents instructed him to step away from the cart. When he hesitated, appearing confused, they repeated the command. His face showed disbelief, then restraint. Within moments, he was escorted out of the aisle, past customers who watched without speaking. The cart remained behind, still filled with unpaid groceries. Surveillance cameras followed the path toward the store's front, documenting a detention that had begun with an accusation and no visible theft. Before that afternoon, his life moved in steady, predictable patterns. He worked full-time for a regional delivery company, starting most mornings before sunrise. His job required long hours and careful attention to detail. He was known among coworkers as reliable and quiet. Payroll records later confirmed consistent employment and no recent disciplinary issues. He paid his bills on time and lived in a modest apartment not far from the grocery store. On the day of the incident, he had finished an early shift. Security footage from his workplace showed him clocking out shortly after noon. He drove directly to the grocery store, a place he had visited many times before. Credit card records would later confirm regular purchases there over the past year. Nothing about his routine suggested risk or instability. Friends later described him as cautious in public spaces. He avoided conflict and rarely drew attention to himself. He preferred simple weekends, laundry, errands, phone calls with family. Saying the grocery trip was part of that routine. His refrigerator at home was nearly empty. Receipts from previous weeks showed small, careful purchases, rather than large or unusual spending. When he entered the store that day, he wore his work uniform, a plain shirt with a company logo and dark pants. Store cameras captured him taking a cart and moving slowly through produce, then dry goods. He checked prices and compared brands. He used his phone briefly, likely reviewing a list. And nothing in the footage showed concealment or rushed behavior. The accusation inside the aisle disrupted more than a single errand. Being confronted publicly carried weight beyond the store's walls. Neighbors sometimes shopped there at the same time. Co-workers occasionally stopped in after shifts. The possibility of being seen in handcuffs or under suspicion created an immediate fear that extended beyond the moment. As agents escorted him toward the front of the store, he understood that the scene might follow him back to work and home. Even without formal charges, public accusation can shape perception. The power difference was clear. 2 federal agents stood in authority. He stood alone, surrounded by strangers who had only seconds to form opinions. Later, when reviewing what happened, investigators would note that he had not attempted to exit the store without paying. But, in that moment, before any review, his ordinary life felt suddenly fragile. The stability he had built through routine and work now depended on how others interpreted a single interaction inside a grocery aisle. Federal agents were not regularly assigned to patrol grocery stores. Their presence that day was connected to a broader retail theft task force operating across the region. According to later filings, the task force focused on organized shoplifting rings and repeat offenders who move stolen goods for profit. Agents sometimes coordinated with local store management when patterns of loss were reported. Store management had recently shared concerns about inventory shortages. Reports showed missing items over several weeks, though no specific suspect had been formally identified. The agreement between the store and federal authorities allowed agents to observe activity on site and respond if they believed a crime was in progress. In most retail theft cases, the standard procedure is simple. A suspect must select merchandise, conceal it, or attempt to leave the store without paying, and pass the final point of sale. That final point of sale usually means crossing the checkout area or exiting the building. Only then can theft be clearly established. Before that point, intent is often difficult to prove. On the day of the incident, the man had not approached the exit. Surveillance footage confirmed he remained inside the aisles, placing items openly into his cart. The agents later stated that his behavior matched patterns they associated with organized retail theft. They pointed to the number of items in his cart and the way he moved between sections of the store. However, no footage showed concealment inside clothing or bags. No alarms had been triggered. No store employee had reported witnessing an attempt to leave without paying. The agents acted based on what they described as reasonable suspicion. In simple terms, reasonable suspicion means an officer believes a crime may be happening based on observable facts, even if full proof is not yet available. The legal line between suspicion and confirmed theft is narrow. Policies often instruct officers to wait until a suspect makes a clear move toward leaving without payment. In this case, the detention occurred before that moment. Internal reports later showed that the agents believed early intervention would prevent potential loss. They also stated that delaying action might allow a suspect to flee. Yet, the store layout placed checkout lanes directly between the aisles and the exit. Any attempt to leave would have been visible and recorded. By stepping into the aisle and confronting him before he reached the registers, the agents made a choice about timing. That choice would later become central to arguments about procedure, authority, and whether suspicion alone justified public detention inside a neighborhood grocery store. As the agents guided him out of the aisle, the store seemed to narrow around them. The path to the front registers was short, but every step felt exposed. Customers paused beside their carts. Some whispered to each other. One person continued recording with a phone held at chest level. The sound of wheels against tile echoed as the unattended cart remained behind. The agents did not place him in handcuffs, but they positioned themselves close enough to control his movement. One walked slightly ahead, clearing space. The other stayed near his shoulder, maintaining physical presence without direct force. The balance of power was visible to anyone watching. Two armed federal officers moved with confidence. He walked between them, hands visible, posture tight. Store cameras above the checkout lanes captured the group approaching. Registers were open. The cashier stood ready to scan items for other customers. He had not yet reached this point before the accusation began. Now, he was escorted past it, without the chance to complete his purchase. A store supervisor joined them near the front. Footage later showed a brief exchange between the supervisor and the agents. The supervisor appeared uncertain, glancing toward the cart left in the aisle, and then back at the man. No merchandise had crossed the registers, and no receipt existed because no transaction had begun. Other shoppers shifted uncomfortably as the scene unfolded. A child stared openly until pulled away by a parent. An elderly man stepped aside to let the group pass, lowering his eyes. The public nature of the detention added weight to the moment. Even without raised voices, the message was clear. An allegation had been made. Authority had acted. He remained cooperative. More body camera footage later showed him standing still as the agents asked for identification. His breathing appeared measured but heavy. His face reflected confusion and disbelief. He looked toward the registers again, as if expecting the misunderstanding to be corrected once someone noticed he had not attempted to leave. Instead, he was led toward a back office near the store entrance. The glass doors to the parking lot were visible only a few feet away. Outside, cars moved in and out of spaces. Stores inside, time felt slowed. The cart of groceries stayed behind in the aisle, untouched. The public spectacle had lasted only minutes, but the impression it left on witnesses was immediate and lasting. The review of evidence began within days of the detention. Store management preserved surveillance footage from multiple angles, including ceiling cameras above the aisles and checkout lanes. The agent's body camera recordings were also logged as part of standard procedure. Together, these recordings created a detailed timeline of the man's movements from entry to detention. Video showed him entering the store alone, taking a cart, and moving steadily through several sections. He selected items openly and placed them inside the cart without concealment. At no point did he move toward the exit doors. The footage confirmed he had not passed the checkout lanes or crossed the final point of sale. In retail theft cases, crossing that point without paying is usually what establishes a completed offense. Transaction records were also reviewed. There was no receipt connected to him because he had not yet begun payment. The absence of a receipt did not prove theft. It simply showed the purchase had not been completed. Investigators also examined whether any items had been hidden under clothing or inside personal bags. Camera angles did not show concealment, and the agent's body camera footage captured their reasoning at the time. They described observing behavior they believed was consistent with organized shoplifting. However, the recordings did not show a clear explanation of how his actions met the legal threshold for theft. Instead, the focus appeared to be on preventing potential loss before it occurred. Legal standards require more than suspicion. To justify detention, officers typically need probable cause. Probable cause means there are clear facts suggesting a crime has been committed or is about to be committed. In this case, the central question became whether placing items in a cart without attempting to leave met that standard. As attorneys later analyzed the footage, they noted the timing. The confrontation happened before he approached the checkout area. The visual evidence showed an incomplete transaction, not a completed theft. Yet the detention had already occurred in full public view. The recordings did not answer every question, but they established one fact clearly. He had not left the store or attempted to bypass payment at the moment federal agents intervened. After the theft allegation did not result in formal criminal charges, the focus shifted from defense to accountability. He returned to work within days, but the incident followed him. Co-workers had seen online clips recorded by customers inside the store. Though the videos were brief, some they showed federal agents escorting him past checkout lanes. The images created questions he had to answer repeatedly. He consulted a civil attorney to understand his options. Civil court differs from criminal court. In criminal cases, the government must prove guilt beyond a high standard. In civil cases, a person can seek money for harm caused by another party's actions. His claim centered on wrongful detention, reputational damage, and emotional distress. He believed the agents acted too early, without enough evidence, and that the public nature of the detention caused lasting harm. The lawsuit sought $30,000 in damages. That amount reflected lost wages from missed shifts, legal consultation fees, and compensation for emotional impact. It also represented what his attorney described as a reasonable figure given the limited duration of the detention and absence of physical injury. Filing the lawsuit required detailed documentation. Surveillance footage, body camera recordings, store policies, and task force agreements were collected. His employment records were included to show stability and the absence of criminal history. The complaint argued that suspicion alone should not justify public restraint inside a grocery store. The federal agents, represented by government counsel, responded by asserting that they acted within their authority, saying they pointed to their role in a retail theft task force and argued that early intervention is sometimes necessary to prevent loss. They also invoked legal protections often available to officers performing official duties. The decision to sue carried risk. Civil cases can be lengthy and expensive. If unsuccessful, plaintiffs may bear their own legal costs. Still, he chose to proceed. For him, the case was not only about money. It was about whether what happened in that aisle met the standard of fairness promised under the law. The courtroom proceedings unfolded months later in federal district court. By then, the grocery store footage and body camera recordings had been reviewed repeatedly by both sides. The central issue was narrow but significant: whether the agents had enough legal basis to detain him before he reached the checkout lanes. His attorney argued that the video evidence showed no completed theft and no clear attempt to leave without paying. In simple terms, the claim was that suspicion alone is not enough. For a detention to be lawful, officers must have probable cause, meaning clear facts pointing to a crime in progress. The footage, the attorney said, showed a man shopping, not stealing. Government counsel responded that law enforcement officers are allowed to act on reasonable belief when they think a crime is about to happen. They emphasized the agents' training and their role in a broader task force targeting organized retail theft. They argued that waiting until a suspect crosses the exit could increase risk and loss. According to their position, the agents observed patterns they associated with coordinated shoplifting operations and intervened accordingly. Another key issue was qualified immunity. This legal principle can protect government officials from personal liability if they did not violate clearly established law. In plain language, it means that even if a mistake was made, officers are often shielded unless the violation was obvious under existing precedent. The court had to decide whether detaining him before he reached checkout clearly broke established legal standards. The judge reviewed the surveillance timeline carefully. The video confirmed that he had not passed the registers. It also showed that the agents identified themselves and did not use physical force beyond guiding him. The duration of the detention was limited to the store and did not involve arrest or booking. Arguments focused less on emotion and more on procedure. The question was not whether the experience felt humiliating. The question was whether it crossed a legal boundary recognized by prior court decisions. Saying the ruling would hinge on that distinction. The court's decision arrived in a written order several weeks after the final hearing. The judge acknowledged that the detention was public and uncomfortable. The opinion also noted that surveillance footage confirmed he had not crossed the checkout area or exited the store. However, the ruling focused on legal standards rather than appearance. The court found that the agents had arguable probable cause to act. In simple terms, this meant the judge believed a reasonable officer could have suspected that theft was about to occur, even if it had not yet been completed. The opinion emphasized that law enforcement officers are sometimes required to make quick decisions based on training and experience. Qualified immunity played a central role. The judge concluded that there was no clearly established case law stating that detaining a shopper before reaching checkout automatically violates constitutional rights. Because the legal boundary was not clearly defined in prior decisions, the agents were shielded from personal liability. As a result, the lawsuit seeking $30,000 in damages was dismissed. He would not receive financial compensation. Each side would bear its own legal costs. The ruling did not declare the detention ideal or necessary. It simply stated that it did not clearly violate existing law. For him, the outcome carried financial and emotional weight. So legal consultations and court filings had required time away from work. The expectation of accountability had shaped months of preparation. Now, the formal avenue for redress had closed. The written opinion became part of the public record. It documented the event, the arguments, and the court's reasoning. Yet, for many observers, the central image remained unchanged. A man stopped in a grocery aisle before he had the chance to pay, and the dismissal of the lawsuit did not end discussion about what happened inside the store. While the court found no clear legal violation, the case highlighted the limits of accountability when authority operates within broad discretion. The written opinion focused on existing legal standards, but it did not address broader concerns about timing, judgment, or public impact. Internal agency policy reviews were conducted as part of routine procedure. Some of these reviews examined whether the agents followed task force guidelines and reporting requirements. According to available summaries, no formal discipline was issued. The agents documented their observations, identified themselves, and completed required reports. From an administrative standpoint, the file was closed. This outcome reflected a larger reality. Federal officers are often protected when acting within the scope of their duties, especially in situations involving suspected criminal activity. The legal threshold for proving misconduct is high. It requires showing not only that an action was mistaken, but that it clearly violated established law. For the public, the difference between legal compliance and perceived fairness can be difficult to reconcile. Surveillance footage remained accessible to attorneys and, in limited clips, to community members who had recorded the incident. Those images shaped personal opinions, even though they did not change the court's conclusion. The case also underscored the power imbalance built into enforcement encounters. In a grocery store aisle, two federal agents held authority backed by law and institutional protection. The individual they detained carried the burden of proving harm after the fact. Once the court ruled, there were few remaining avenues for challenge. No policy changes were formally announced. The task force continued its operations. From a procedural standpoint, the system had worked as designed. Yet, the episode left behind a documented record showing how quickly suspicion can escalate into public detention, and how difficult it can be to translate that experience into legal remedy. In the months after the ruling, his daily routine slowly returned to its former rhythm. He continued working early shifts and shopping at stores closer to home. He did not return to the grocery store where the detention occurred. The memory of standing under bright lights, surrounded by strangers, remained vivid. Even without a criminal record, the experience altered how he moved through public spaces. Friends and coworkers eventually stopped asking about the case. Online clips of the incident faded from local attention, yet the written court opinion remained permanently accessible in public records. It documented the facts, the arguments, and the legal reasoning that led to dismissal. For him, saying that document carried a quiet weight. It acknowledged what happened, but did not define it as unlawful. Financially, the loss of the $30,000 claim meant absorbing legal costs without compensation. The amount had never represented a windfall. It reflected what he believed was fair for lost time, stress, and public embarrassment. Without it, the impact became personal rather than institutional. The grocery aisle where the confrontation began continued operating as usual. Shoppers pushed carts past the same shelves. Security cameras remained fixed in place. Nothing in the physical space marked what had occurred. Yet the footage from that day preserved a record of suspicion turning into detention before a purchase was complete. The case did not end with punishment or reform. It ended with a clarification of legal boundaries. The court concluded that the agent's actions did not clearly violate established law. That conclusion closed the lawsuit but did not erase the experience. For him, the lesson was practical and lasting. Authority can intervene quickly, even during ordinary routines. Legal systems may examine those moments carefully, but the outcome may rest on technical standards rather than personal impact. The image of a cart left behind in an aisle became a quiet reminder of how fragile normal life can feel when suspicion meets power.